Okay, thank you everyone for attending the Justice Initiative info session. We are so thankful to have you here. And we really, really appreciate your interest and your taking the time. Before we start, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the profound sense of loss and grief I'm sure all of us are feeling regarding the loss of Justice Ginsburg. So before we get started, we wanted to take a second and have a moment of silence and then invite Lucy Litt, who is 2L at Harvard Law School, who has been working very closely with us in building the initiative, to share some reflections she had about Justice Ginsburg's legacy.
I was surprised and humbled when Professor Hanson and Enyimale asked me to briefly share my reflections on our collective loss of Justice Ginsburg last night. This is an esteemed, admirable group of leaders, and I am hardly the best positioned among us to provide the right words in this overwhelming moment. Still, I hope some of you find comfort or solidarity in this. I'm heartbroken, as I'm sure are many of you, and so grateful to Justice Ginsburg all at once. Sometimes a loss like this, the loss of someone who was a giant and an icon in every way, feels like it leaves a gaping hole in the world. Last night, I prioritized taking time to honor all that she was in isolation from my grave concern over what comes next. Today, as I commenced taking a more action-oriented approach to Justice Ginsburg's passing, these were my reflections. We have all been fortunate to know we could rely on Justice Ginsburg's leadership over the years. I had the feeling that I'm not ready to take on whatever the future holds completely without her towering presence at the helm, that so few of us are ready. It was a similar feeling to when one loses a loved one, like a parental figure, grandparent, or mentor. But then I realized three things. First, Justice Ginsburg paved the way for so many of us. She gave us the tools we need. Second, if this summer and the years of racism and violence leading to it has solidified anything in my mind, it's that we have astounding leaders, including extraordinary women leaders everywhere. The people I have met through this initiative alone already give me hope. Third, Justice Ginsburg didn't have an RBG to look to all these years. She paved the way without her own example as a guide. But as Professor Hanson reminded me, she looked to Thurgood Marshall and Polly Murray as role models, just as many of us looked to their examples alongside hers. We also have the capability to take on whatever comes next within ourselves and within this community we are building together. We're glad you're here and eager to work together towards realizing the possibilities for which Justice Ginsburg and so many others paved the way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lucy. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to invite Justin and John to introduce themselves so we can kick things off.
Thank you for that. And you know, this is such a momentous moment in our history right now. And it's really an honor that you all have decided to take this Saturday to spend some time with us to talk about something that really goes to the heart of, I believe, what was Justice Ginsburg's mission, was to promote justice and to do so in a way that is not just fair for those who are powerful, but for those who are often left out. And that's really what we're hoping that this project will allow us to do, is to help to exchange ideas and to spread ideas that are about providing justice for more of us, not just some of us. And so that's really why I'm a part of this project. My name is Justin Hansford. I'm a law professor at Howard University, the director of our Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. And I teach our movement lawyering clinic, as well as constitutional law. And, you know, I was really just excited about this possibility to be a part of something that would further the mission that we have at Howard of creating lawyers that would follow the example of Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall, to use law as part of a social engineering project to make the world a better place. That being said, we want this project to be a project that builds community with everybody. And I think that's another unique opportunity that we are being provided, the opportunity to break down institutional boundaries. It's all well and good that we may have a critical race theory class, for example, at our own law schools, but the opportunity to have students from law schools across the country be able to be in community with each other, free of charge, to talk about these ideas, to learn from each other. This is just a once in a lifetime opportunity, we believe, that probably we've never had before in the legal academy. So it's just an honor to be able to be a part of creating something like this. We know that for many of us, this year, this summer, even today, this moment, these are all times where we know that we are reminded that we are in crisis. It's a crisis of justice. In the same way that as we face the pandemic and the medical crisis, the medical profession is called to step up. As lawyers, when we face a crisis of justice, it's the legal profession that people look to be the front lines in that response. When we're talking about racism, we're talking about sexism, we're talking about things that are happening on a constitutional level, authoritarianism, fascism, even. All of these things are things that call for a response from people who are going to be on the front lines in the fight for justice. And so we're hoping to get you ready for that response with this project. And we think that it's urgent, and we're really glad that you have decided to learn more about what we're planning to do over the next few months. So with that, John, I would like to pass it to you to explain in more detail.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Lucy, and then Yumali. Really appreciate that. I'm immediately reminded why I want to be part of this group, and I'm happy to be participating. Right now, I'm feeling as a great deal of sadness, but also perhaps a little more fire in me to move forward with this. And so I'm very glad to be talking about it here today, despite the situation. I'll say a little bit about myself. I've been teaching at Harvard Law School for the last 30 years. And I've kind of came to my work in stages through an evolution, starting as someone who was a legal economist who came to be known as a liberal legal economist, who then I got involved in all the documents that were coming out of the 1990s about tobacco and what the tobacco firms were doing. And it really opened my eyes to the kinds of false storytelling that was inherent, not just publicly about products as deadly as tobacco, but the same kind of storytelling that was inherent in legal theory and in law, and really replicating some of the same devices. And it led me to an exploration of mind sciences and more recently kind of critical theory, though I'm still a novice in that space. And it led me to create some organizations at the law school, the Project on Law and Mind Sciences from around early 2000s up until around 2014. And then with a group of students, and in particular, Jacob Lipton, a 2014 grad at Harvard Law School, we created the Systemic Justice Project. And in that space, began working with students and really focusing on problems and the law's connection to those problems, how to think about and theorize those problems, and to build systems that might address them. That's been a wonderful experience. And then this summer, with the amazing people at People's Parity Project, including Molly Coleman and the Justice Catalyst, and a group of really committed, justice-oriented, systemic lawyers. I had the pleasure of co-founding and co-creating the COVID-19 Rapid Response System Summer Institute. And that was a wonderful organization in which around 250 students joined us to work with about 70 different organizations around the country. And we were also providing a a good deal of programming. And in that programming, I got to meet a lot of people, including many of these wonderful students from 70 different law schools around the country. And I got to work with, among others, Justin Hansford, who I think was a speaker or panelist a couple of times, and was among the people that really opened my eyes to a lot of the important work going on in community lawyering and movement lawyering. And out of that was a sense that this is a moment in which we might want to build something, as Justin and I has described it, that would be for all students and also for lawyers and law professors who share this common goal of justice and really want to do something about it together and want to build the kind of community that Justin referred to. And so that's what brings us to this moment. And I wonder, Justin, if you might say a little bit about what brought you here.
Certainly. I was someone who was a student of critical race theory when I was a 1L, and I'm going to talk about this more a bit later as well. But I was really able to get through law school because I had a critical race theory lens that made law school bearable for me. And then once I became an attorney and decided I wanted to enter the legal academy, I was at St. Louis University Law School when Mike Brown was killed. He lived about 10 minutes away from me, and I became part of that movement in Ferguson to ultimately fight for what we would later call the broader Black Lives Matter movement, and really was hoping that the law would be a tool to allow me to contribute to something that I felt and continue to feel is such an urgent crisis that we have to use every tool that we can muster. As someone who studied the law, has dedicated his life to the law, knowing the limits of the law, knowing how law has been used normally as a tool to hurt Black people in the United States. I began thinking about ways to try to use it to help, and that it's been a consistent issue that was not necessarily something that I was taught directly in law school. That was something that I had to learn through interventions by progressive law scholars and others, that being using the law to help as opposed to hurt, not to uphold systems, but to tear down when necessary and try to reinvent and change for the better. So for me, it's been just a pleasure to use my time to try to not only do that, but to flesh out ideas in terms of how to do that more effectively, and to help train law students and others to do so in the future. This opportunity to work with the Systemic Justice Institute this summer was, in my short time as director of the Thurgood Marshall Center, was the best opportunity I've had thus far to make that vision a reality using this platform. The students were fantastic. The students were engaged. We were able to do some wonderful things, bring lawsuits, create reports. We did legal observing during protests, tried to file lawsuits to have curfews lifted. A number of things that we did were only possible because of the Summer Systems Institute. So that's really what brought me here, to be able to participate in this program with John, and the opportunity to take more of that energy and to expand it to a broader audience, to apply it to folks from around the country who may not have been involved during this past summer. It's a wonderful opportunity that I'm really excited to be able to pursue.
As law professors, Justin and I really share the starting point that legal education is part of the problem. When we look around the world and we see the fires and the crises and the injustices, we feel we can trace aspects of that back to what's happening in the law school classroom, because so much of the structures of law are the ones that are kind of undergirding the systems that are producing those injustices. And the people, the law people that act as the personnel in our systems are being trained by us, and thinking like a lawyer in some ways means and has meant thinking to be complicit in or complacent with the very laws that we are justifying and rationalizing much of the time in traditional legal education. And we are bringing to our law schools many of the best justice-oriented, most committed young people in each generation, and telling them, come here if you want to do something about justice. And when they arrive, they're often disappointed with what they find. Part of what is motivating this project is our commitment to helping to build an organization that might help change systems. Let me just add one point, that from where we sit, this moment is unlike anything that most of us have experienced in our lives. That it's a moment in which what had seemed fixed and rock and granite-like only 5-10 years ago, now is beginning to feel moldable. And with that, there is a huge risk that what is changeable will actually get worse, but also a potential that what we might mold, what we might build, we might be able to make it better. And what really brings us together is the hopefulness that perhaps with our coming together, empowering each other in law, we can connect our shared interest in these various islands across institutions, pull them together and have more efficacy in bringing about a more just world. And Yamali, I now will definitely turn it to you, and you can give some background for where we're at.
Sure, just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Enumali Agada. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2017, and since then have been practicing in DC. So I've been working closely with Justin and John in kind of developing our idea of the initiative. And one thing that keeps popping up, which John has already hinted at, is this idea that we are in this very historically critical moment. And because of that, the time is now, even if it feels too soon. And by that, I mean this opportunity and obligation that John speaks of is incredibly exciting, but also quite, at least to me, quite daunting and scary to think of all the work that needs to be done for us to push things where they need to go. But one thing that we have kept saying in our conversations is that our objective here is to build something. And whenever you're building something, that means that it's not going to be perfect. Perfection is not our goal. Our objective here is to build something useful to the participants, something that is impactful to the legal community, and something that really pushes legal education and the legal profession forward. And as long as we're making strides towards that, we view that as a success. So as has been mentioned, this program is very unprecedented in a number of ways. First of all, it's a collaboration between Harvard Law School and Howard Law School. It's a pilot program this year. And because of that, we imagine it starting very, very modestly. That being said, it's still a huge undertaking that will require a great deal of work on the part of everybody involved and a shared commitment. As I said, this process is bound to be imperfect, but our goal is just to lay the groundwork for something bigger. So our hope is that after this pilot year, we can kind of work out all the kinks and then have this become something much more widespread, something that is across all campuses, all law school campuses across the United States, possibly even across the world. So we would just like to say that this process kind of has already started, and that we have been working closely over the past few weeks with about 30 law schools, or 30 law students from law schools all across the country, who have been crucial in kind of helping us build the initiative infrastructure. So we just quickly wanted to shout out these different teams that have been working so hard to help us get where we are. First of all, the online infrastructure team, which has been tasked with building our website, building our social media platforms, our Slack channels, teaching me, John and Justin, how to use social media, which must be very frustrating. So we wanted to thank them for that. The production team, which has been tasked with organizing and preparing content for the various panels we intend to have for initiative programming. This is going to be described in more detail later, but we wanted to thank the production team. We also wanted to thank the student outreach team, and they've been responsible for reaching out to different, to not only their law schools, but across law schools to kind of get other students involved via student orgs. They've been reaching out to public interest offices, clinics to garner interest. There's been a huge social media push. We had our student-based info session last week, and there was a fantastic turnout and a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. So we wanted to thank all of the students that have already participated. We also wanted to thank Lucy and Jack, who are both on this webinar, both 2Ls at Harvard Law School, and who have both been so incredibly helpful in keeping us organized and moving the ball forward. So thank you everyone for all of your hard work thus far. And now I think we are going to talk about the purposes of the initiative, and I'm going to hand it off to Justin.
Thank you. Well, I think many of you are self-selected to understand why we're doing this, and so I think that this will be a pretty short portion, but we know that there is a long-term and a short-term problem when it comes to law school and legal education, and you could maybe call it the bait and switch that happens with people who enter law school to promote justice and exit law school with loans tasked to promote corporate interests. So the outcome of that is not just frustrated law students, but disconnected, disillusioned lawyers, and also often even law professors and scholars who have a difficult time bringing their full selves to their work and to their workplace, and ultimately law schools and legal institutions that are not fulfilling their calling, their mission to really bring more justice into the world as they should be in our view. So I think that this understanding of the huge impact and even transformational possibility of this moment, as I said earlier, more of us on Zoom than ever before in human history, more of us able to communicate with each other than ever before. And this opportunity to build this community, not just of law students exposed to a critical race theory or feminist theory in the law, not just movement lawyers who are working on the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter or climate justice, not just law professors who are critical race theory scholars or others who are at legal conferences, people of color conferences, law and society conferences, but the ability for all of these groups to come together and create a community that would be very expensive to do otherwise. Many of you have been to these expensive conferences. It would be very expensive to do it otherwise. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so that's really the transition that we're hoping that you can help us to provide to ensure that this is not just law students themselves in this community, but that the lawyers and the legal scholars also are partaking, learning, growing, and helping to be a presence as we build out this project to become something really meaningful for all of us. So, and Molly, I was going to come back to you if you had any more thoughts to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that keeps coming up in all of our conversations is that there is this complete lack of responsiveness from law schools, and I would say from the legal community at large, to current injustices or current issues. I'm sure everyone will get into this during the testimonial session, but when I was in law school, it very much felt like this complete disconnect from everything that was happening in the world around me. And so our objective here is to build a legal community that is very much responsive to what is happening in the world at that moment. And we say that aware that there's already incredible work going on. There are incredible movement attorneys, organizers, people striking, activists who are already on the ground engaging with a lot of these issues. So part of our ambition is to kind of build a bridge between our community and the incredible work that is already being done, and find a way to connect law students, professors, practitioners, to some of these people who are already doing incredible work on the ground. So another huge kind of goal or objective we have in mind is to build a pipeline or a network of sorts, and continue to build this network as time goes on. And John, I think you have a few things you would like to add.
Well, I'd love to jump in on that. I thought that was great. Just, I will say, what you just described can be also redescribed as like elements of power, that there are, and we know many law students and would-be lawyers who come believing that what they want to do is make a more just world, have particular ideas in mind about, you know, impact litigation or movement lawyering, but find that it's very difficult to get there from law school. And also in law schools, there are these remarkable professors. Many of them are in clinical professors, some podium faculty who are doing really great work, but they often stand as kind of islands, as exceptions to what is the tradition, and in some sense are disempowered in relation to into the larger pool in which they're operating. Part of what we imagine is a connection of all of those people, where there is the kind of power building that comes just from finding there are people who share your goals, realizing, you know, what you're experiencing actually has a name, or people have thought about that and described it in various ways, that there are other things you can do, there are ways to push back, there are ways to build movements where you sit, including in law schools. There's so much to be gained from this kind of collaboration or connection that is otherwise lost. Now that possibility is not unprecedented. That's not new. We know that there are groups who share a common goal that doesn't happen to be justice, who have managed to build real power in law, and in creating laws, in the judiciary, in the legal profession, in law schools, in legal theory. And you only have to look at law and economics from where I come, that there was immense amount of money and energy and commonality of purpose that informed so much of what led to the rise, the power of this kind of neoliberal takeover of law and legal theory. And what Justin is pointing out is that, you know, that's something that only money could buy. But actually, maybe this is a moment in which we can, through Zoom, build the kinds of connections that can begin to connect the islands, that can empower many otherwise sort of marginalized individuals. And with that, we can actually begin to make change across all of the institutions. That is at least one of my grand hopes. I'm prepared to be wrong and still try, but it does seem to me worth the effort.
I love that. Prepared to be wrong and still try. I think that should be our motto. So as we've said, one thing that we hope to do here is build a community of law students, young lawyers, experienced lawyers, law professors, activists, organizers. And because of that, we thought it would be important to kind of talk about what we envision each different group could get out of a community like this. So I'm going to start. I think that one thing law students can definitely get out of this regarding the problems that we seek to address in legal education. A lot of law students saying that they feel completely disconnected from the things that brought them to law school in the first place. And I remember feeling this very acutely, kind of sitting in property and contracts class and thinking like, this is not what I wanted, and this is not what I thought this would be. So one thing we hope to do is to kind of help these students maintain maintain that kind of hunger for justice and equality and all of those things that brought them to law school in the first place, that truthfully law school can kind of deaden as the years go on. For young lawyers, we hope that it'll help them to maintain these ideals and objectives, even as they work in a system or systems that quickly kind of make you cynical and quite disillusioned. And we think this will be particularly helpful for young lawyers who, for whatever reason, are not able to do social justice work full-time or pursue their social justice passion full-time. This will be a way for them to stay connected, to remain in a network of people doing that work, to kind of know what's going on, to find ways, like little ways, depending on how much time they have, to really participate. And to kind of continue building their expertise, continue building their passion, building their networks, discussing and exploring ideas, and contributing to their growth to becoming justice-minded lawyers and advocates. So we certainly hope that is the case. We think we are definitely on our way there. One common piece of feedback we got after last week's info session for law students was a lot of law students said that they did not realize that other people kind of felt that sense of disillusionment and kind of being disconnected in law school. So just in kind of sharing that experience and giving voice to that feeling, it seems like we're already making progress, and just letting people know that they're not alone, and that this is actually a very real thing, that real phenomenon that is happening. So I'm going to pass it on to Justin now.
Sure. And yeah, I'll be brief. Like I said earlier, I feel that my experience in law school was colored by a need to bring my own lens in order to ensure that the work I did was relevant to my purpose. I entered law school because I wanted to help Black people. Specifically, I wanted to work on the struggle for Black freedom. I came to law school and they were teaching me about torts and contracts, and I wasn't clear what the point was in terms of what my mission was for me. And then I stumbled across Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and the work of critical race theorists, in part because I was part of a section at Georgetown Law School called Section 3 that exposed me to some of those ideas. But then I started to see that every class I was taking was relevant to that particular work: contracts, torts, constitutional law, even property, if you can believe that. There was a critical race theory way of thinking about each of these things that really made it exciting and relevant, and made me interested in coming to law school and doing all of the reading, and even going beyond that to find out why it was relevant to me. And we started a reading group on that issue. Soon we ended up creating a critical race theory law journal at Georgetown. But really it was this ability to make sure that my vision, my lens was being applied so that the knowledge could work for what I felt was important to me. That's really what allowed me to get through law school and ultimately to become an attorney and law professor myself. And I'm really excited for the opportunity to be able to extend that type of education to people who at their law schools and their communities might not have that lens, especially for those who are aspiring to become movement lawyers, or those who want to work in civil rights, or who want to work with organizers on the front lines of these movements that are happening and that will continue to happen over the next few months. People want to see how what they're working on can become part of their mission, and that will make it relevant to them, and it will help us to create more movement lawyers, more civil rights lawyers, more lawyers who are working on the front lines, who otherwise might not have even seen the possibility to do this type of work. And for those who are already in the field, even who may be doing this work but not doing it to the best of their capacity because they have not really been exposed to the analysis that can help them understand power or understand how to work effectively with organizers or work effectively with clients and people in low-income communities. This is also a chance for you to go back and get that exposure that you never got in law school, that you should have gotten, but you did not get for whatever reason. Some of you had to take bar courses. Some of you just didn't have that opportunity at your law school. For whatever reason, this is a chance to go and get that opportunity for free. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of us. And so I am going to pass it to John. I know he has some presentations that we were going to share, some voices of law students themselves that really speak directly to some of the issues that we have been discussing so far.
A couple things I want to add from maybe slightly different perspectives, my own and others that I saw this summer. I felt that so many of the lawyers who participated as panelists or speakers this summer got the pleasure out of that experience, which those of us who have the privilege to teach get from our occupation, an opportunity to think about issues and to share that and pass on what we're thinking to students that want to learn it. And that it turns out to be one of the greatest, most rewarding kind of experiences that I've ever had as I think back about what brings me kind of joy in life. I think I saw that among the participants who joined us this summer, who were lawyers, law professors, and so forth. And they not only got that experience, but I think many of them, as they're kind of working away in the trenches, trying to take on formidable foes, they are often exhausted and unrewarded. And suddenly there's 150 faces looking back and asking questions and really excited. And it wasn't just great for the students, it was incredibly nourishing, I think, for them. And for whatever that's worth, I think that's part of what people might get out of this experience that may not be obvious. And I will just tell you, as someone who's been teaching law for 30 years and considers myself a legal scholar, I learned more this summer than I probably learned since 1L. And a lot of what I learned in 1L, I've been trying to unlearn. And so I really feel like for me as a law professor, I found new ways of knowing, new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching problems, kind of different methods, and gained what felt like a new perspective on what lawyering could be. That has influenced my teaching and my thinking more generally. I think it will make me better at what I want to be doing, which is devoting myself as a scholar to promoting justice from that perspective. So for whatever that's worth, I would offer that for reasons to consider participating. But Justin is right. I think the best thing I have to offer is the descriptions provided by two students who were at our student information session last week, who talked about what they got out of the summer. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Professor Hansen, Professor Hansford, and Animale. My name is Layla. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., where I just started my second year of law school. I think I'll preface this by saying that, like, typically law school related events are very draining and anxiety inducing, and I come to this space as like a space that I found in law school that's been the opposite of that, that's been very empowering and energizing and useful also. So I wanted to offer that. My background and like my involvement in this project is related to this project's predecessor, which was a summer fellowship that connected hundreds of law students and legal professionals from across the country to respond to COVID and to respond to the uprising of the summer. And that was a very valuable space for me. And it was most valuable because I think my first year of law school didn't introduce how important collaboration is to the law and to like using the law as a shield and using it to advance justice. And I'm very empowered by the collaboration that this program and this project has offered me and others. And I think I believe in it and I want it to continue. And these programs, as always, are what we make of them and how we decide to use them. And it's a new space, so it's not tied to like institutional history or funding or like a board or like any old model. It's really here to be what we need it to be for us as law students in this moment. So yeah, I encourage you to apply, and I'd be honored to learn about the law with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla. Now we invite Michael to share his experience.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'd like to share a little bit of a story, a little different than what Layla just shared. I'm a 2L at Rutgers Law. I'm kind of an outlier, but I hope my experience in my first year of law school is something some of you can relate to. I came to law school thinking that law school is like their world, and I'm not really even supposed to be here. Because I can't remember a time in my life that I didn't know the system was rotten. I'm not only the first one in my family to go to law school, I'm the first to go to college. I'm the first one to not go to jail. So this is like incredible to even be here. I dropped out of high school. I grew up thinking prison was like a rite of passage. I mean, I was scared of jail, but like I viewed it as part of becoming a man or whatever. And that's very different than the typical mindset that you'll find with law students. I thought being a man meant fistfights and running the streets and going to jail. And then I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and my entire life changed. That one book reframed for me what it meant to be a man. And now it meant fighting injustice, fighting racism, fighting oppression, and most of all, fighting to educate myself. So after I dropped out, but armed with a new perspective, I pursued a career in music to work outside the system. I had no intention of ever trying to work within the system. My music was anti-establishment, political music, kind of like Dead Prez, if any of you are familiar with them.
Yeah.
My career was great. I got to tour the country. I got to do what I loved for years, which most people don't get to say that. But at a certain point, that lifestyle got tiresome, and I still love music, but not the business. So I decided to go to law school to learn the rules. So basically I could break the rules or at least fight to change them. And then law school started. And as much as I told myself it's an institution created by and for the oppressor class, I still found myself like shocked at the disconnect between the coursework and the real world. Law school doesn't teach us how to be lawyers. It teaches you how to be law students. Contracts class, no mention of broken treaties between indigenous people and the US government. Property class, no talk of redlining or intentional segregation in housing. Instead, we learn about fee-tails. I still don't know what fee-tails are. I don't want to know what fee-tails are. We learn about rules that are set up to protect the property of the rich with no context for the impact on the masses. Wouldn't it be interesting to hear these classes framed in an abolitionist context? It would be so much more engaging and enriching. No real discussion of landlord-tenant laws in which the scales are tipped toward the owner class. And my professor, the worst part of it was my professors are so-called progressives. Beware liberals. Malcolm X taught me that a long time ago. I felt completely disillusioned and resigned to just earn my JD and get the hell out of law school. Then I became a fellow with this group of characters in the summer, and I learned that there's thousands of people who want to fight for justice. Purvi Shah she spoke at one of the events, and she said something along the lines of this. She said there's 1.3 million lawyers, only 3% work in public interest. That means 97% of lawyers work on behalf of the rich and powerful. Meanwhile, over 20% of entering law students report an interest in working for social justice. So 20+% intend to fight for justice, but only 3% end up there. It turns out law school churns out more oppressors. Professor Hansford and Professor Hanson inspired me over the summer to start a movement lawyering journal. And it's not a typical journal. It's one that includes voices of practitioners and activists and affected community members, not just academics. Quick plug, by the way, if anybody wants to join, I'll drop my participate, I'll drop my contact info in the chat. I met other fellows in the program that I now consider friends, like Layla, who just spoke. She's kind of a hero of mine, and Esme, who is my main collaborator. This organization breathed life into my law school journey, and I can't wait. I still can't wait to get the hell out of law school. Now I have a group I look forward to meeting with and learning from, and I think we can collaborate as a collective and transform the oppressive systems that far too many people just accept. Maybe we can even transform the way law schools operate. I'll leave with this. I heard someone say, I think it was over the summer at the Institute, if you ever thought about what you would be doing, like if you were free during like times of slavery and Jim Crow, the truth is the real answer to that question of what you would do then is whatever you're doing right now. So let's work together to bring about change, because the world does not have to be the way it is. Thanks for listening to my rant.
Wow.
Happy to be here.
Preach, preacher.
Glad this is recording. That was beautiful.
And Molly, I think my job is done here. I think I don't want to follow Michael.
I know. I was
Layla.
hoping I would not have the misfortune of following Michael, even via video. Yes, but I will speak very, very briefly about my kind of experience as a law student. As I said, I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2017, and I wanted to go to law school for all of the reasons that we've spoken about, because I grew up reading about Nelson Mandela and Thurgood Marshall, and in my mind I was like, okay, this is what lawyers do. Lawyers are at the forefront of social justice. They push things forward. They are really kind of like pillars of society in that way. And then I went to law school. I became a 1L and became very disillusioned very, very quickly. I remember one particular moment in my criminal law class where we read the Trayvon Martin case as a study on jury instruction. And that just seemed so incredibly off to me. There was no talk at all of like context of where that case was situated within America's broader history of racism and oppression of people of color. None of that. It was just kind of like Trayvon Martin, jury instruction, let's move on. And I remember leaving that class shaken, I think is the only word for it, and kind of questioning whether law school was, well, doubting that law school was what I'd come in thinking it was. And then I was a 2L when Mike Brown was killed. And I remember all of this happening in the world, and kind of law school being this like island unto itself, where the institution wasn't really engaging, wasn't really talking about it. Of course, there were students protesting and making moves and doing all of that good work, but that was us doing that in addition to our classwork. Like the institution made no space for us to even process or grieve, let alone act in response to this horrific injustice that we all had just experienced. And I remember kind of getting the school to even have town halls to talk about race and what was going on in the country. It was like pulling teeth. And I remember after that experience really, really considering leaving law school and questioning whether I wanted to be a lawyer, questioning whether being a lawyer was the way to kind of achieve the ends that I wanted to achieve. And I really, really struggled with that. Thankfully, Professor Hansen, John was my 1L section leader and became a mentor of mine. And I was one of those students who was regularly in his office kind of complaining and talking about this disconnect that I felt. And I was also able to build a community of fellow students around me who kind of felt that same way and were able to validate the feelings that I had. Had I not kind of had those sources and those people around me, I probably would not have finished law school, in all honesty. So hopefully an initiative like this provides an environment so students don't have to feel that way. They always have a space to go to where they're being validated, where they can go and work on issues that they care about, where they don't feel that they're being asked to shut out injustices that are happening in the world in real time and focus on, you know, just their schoolwork, but actually realize that focusing on injustices that are happening in real time is part of what makes you a good lawyer and a good advocate. And that is something that should be, that's a crucial piece of your legal education. That's not something that's a distraction. So just wanted to share my experience. I hope that was useful. And now I want to pass it along to Dean Strang, who has been kind enough to offer to share his own experience and his own thoughts.
Thanks, Anamali, and thank you, Justin and John, for including me here. My best guess about why I'm included here is rooted in John's frequent recurrence to the truth that legal education tends to be siloed. Those of you who know John will have heard him say this, and I'm either not siloed for our purposes here, or maybe I'm in 3 or 4 different silos and don't know where I belong. But I graduated from law school just over 35 years ago, primarily have been a practitioner since then, initially with a large firm in a very conventional role, and then through a series of happy accidents as a criminal defense lawyer in very small firms primarily, also as a lawyer in an institutional role for a very short time as an assistant U.S. attorney, a disastrously bad one, and then for a longer time as a public defender. I've also written a couple of books of legal history and a number of law review articles, and recently have taken 17 years of adjunct teaching and moved that into full-time teaching in a doctrinal position at law schools, not in a clinical position. And with that preface, part of what I find so attractive about this experiment that Justin and Anamali and John have put together, it is its potential to break us out of our silos. There are, of course, doctrinal silos in legal education, which leaves somebody like Justin initially wondering, does critical race theory have anything to do with first-year property? And he may or may not have been introduced to the redlining realities that Michael mentioned. He may or may not have had a chance to learn about how tenancies in common and partition actions historically have been used to dispossess Black people of land, especially in the South, from sharecropper days to the present. But you know, that sort of connection to practice, to reality, to the lives that people actually live can be lost when we get focused on doctrinal silos. Another form of silo here that's less considered, I think, is the silos that our respective law schools themselves represent. And so the mere fact that Howard University and Harvard University, you know, are pairing their law schools in this effort is itself radical in the sense of making a change and causing people to see ways in which we are isolated artificially one from another, even though we're theoretically all engaged in the same undertaking. I think a third kind of silo, to again borrow John's view, is, you know, you've got the legal education folks, the professoriate, and they get siloed between doctrinal and experiential or clinical in many schools, although schools are not monolithic in that respect, as one of our participants has noted. But it's a frequent sort of division between doctrinal and clinical sides. But even then, within the world of legal education, they're quite separated from practitioners of law as on the whole. And this is a common complaint if you survey students, that they aren't exposed meaningfully to practitioners, other than perhaps if they can get a scarce seat in a valued clinical program, or connect with some sort of experiential learning program that then allows them to work with practitioners in some way. And I think a final sort of silo, as I see it, is that the connections people make in law school tend to be, if not limited entirely to their own law school. Their mentors tend to be faculty on their schools, for example. They're at least regional. You see East Coast or New England sort of networks of people. You see Midwest, you see West Coast, you see, sort of Northwest. These are very sort of regional mentoring networks or connections that very often I think law students, and for that matter, law professors, are able to make. This is an experience here potentially, if it works, that will demonstrate it all doesn't have to be so, that there's no reason a Howard Law student can't make a real connection with a Drake University law professor or with a practitioner in Fresno, California. And that kind of thing, I think, can happen through this initiative, this pilot project. And in doing that, notice how the truth of what Animali said about the objective being to build something, her first comments included that, comes out. Notice the truth of what Justin said, that the idea here is social engineering to make the world a better place. These folks are talking about construction. Now, they may be interested in deconstruction, and that's an important part of what we're doing, is taking on existing structures, cross-examining them or interrogating them, taking them apart. But that's not where this experiment is stopping. These people here are looking to construct something in its place, to draw on, at the most abstract levels, the best ideals that law can offer, and build something important from that. So this isn't about cancellation, it's about construction in the end. And I think that really deserves our active support and involvement. And I'll close simply by saying that John made the point that we're in a moment where suddenly institutions and social structures seem moldable. Well, they don't seem moldable just to us. I mean, there is an opportunity, yes, but there's also an obligation, because reactionary elements are working very hard to mold right now too. They also see an opportunity in this moment, an opportunity to reconstruct false stories, false origin myths, revitalize those, push us back to a world of 1968 where order could be equated with the completeness of law, or at least order is sufficient to serve the ends of law on behalf of the relatively affluent or propertied and to the disadvantage of everyone else. you know, if you look at what's happening out there right now, the reactionary elements in this country, which are much better funded than we are working intentionally right now. And they have widely accepted, even though false, stories and myths to fall back on and to resurrect. Just part of why it's so important that we offer something constructive here. So, you know, whether you look at what's happening with voting rights in Florida, and, you know, as sort of repressive forces lost the opportunity to disempower convicted felons forever, they retrenched and said, well, then how about if we at least try to keep disenfranchised the poorest among the ex-felons who haven't paid their court obligations? And they've succeeded just this past week in the 11th Circuit in exactly that effort. In my own state, Wisconsin, the voting rights fight has led to some right-wing lawyers being paid by the end of July more than $4 million in taxpayer money to try to restrict access to the ballot in the state. And the folks who are working nationwide on voting rights are playing a game of whack-a-mole right now, because those who would restrict access to democracy through the ballot box are well-funded and are moving just as fast as anybody can to try to knock down their bad ideas. So the opportunity here, I think, really does come with an obligation, and that obligation has to be constructive. If we don't want the resurgence of false stories and false myths of the past, we really have to offer something more attractive to law students and legal educators and practitioners that will allow them to connect across the artificial boundaries that John talks about so much. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Dean. I wanted to give the floor to Kay-Sue Park, my good friend, law professor at Georgetown University Law Center, a scholar in property law, immigration law, American Indian law, critical race theory, and more. So I could go on and on introducing her, but I think it might be best just to allow her the floor to speak and share any thoughts that she might have about things that are happening. Kay-Sue?
Thanks so much, Justin, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this event and help launch this incredible initiative. So I teach at Georgetown, as Justin said, and where I teach property. I heard a few comments about property, like how could property be interesting or have anything to do about critical race studies. I want to say that this summer I actually got a lot of thank you notes from students in my property law class from the spring, thanking me for being the only professor in 1L who provided them with some material for understanding the uprising and the things that were happening that they saw in the country around them, in particular about redlining, but not only about redlining. And they asked even for more reading materials so they could deepen their knowledge of what was going on. And what was clear was not only were they hungry to understand more, but they really did feel like large parts of their legal education had not equipped them to understand what was happening or what was possible. Because that happened, I actually wrote up just sort of like a descriptive piece about how I taught property. It's called Conquest and Slavery as the Foundation of the Property Law course. It's available on SSRN if anyone's interested. Those are topics that a lot of people skip when they come to property, but in my view, they explain quite a lot about the subject. So before coming to Georgetown, I was a critical race studies fellow at UCLA, where I had confirmed, if I didn't already know, I already sort of knew, but because of all the different kinds of work that were happening there within that program, I definitely understood that critical race studies is actually the name for a very rich and broad paradigm that covers a lot. To the extent that race has been pushed out of legal education in a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different ways to bring it back in. And so it's a really huge topic, and maybe I'll just say a little bit about my particular approach to it. So before I was the Critical Race Studies Fellow, I was a foreclosure and eviction defense attorney on the border, where I really continued the practice experience I began as a law student. I went to law school. I was in John Hanson's section, and I became very involved during law school in the response to the foreclosure crisis. We were really putting together both a kind of movement organizing and legal response to that crisis to try to keep people in their homes. And so I bring that practice experience and concern for the contemporary dispossession, displacement of historically marginalized groups to the histories that I write about settlement and conquest, historical dispossession and displacement, which to me is really the story of the creation of the property system and the real estate market in this country. And one thing that I've had to kind of contend with while working on these histories is the problem of erasure. And it turns out in legal scholarship, you need to sort of prove the erasures before you can try to address them or offer a different kind of story. And in doing this kind of research to really go back through the history of how property law has been taught or other subjects have been taught or how the histories have been written, you know, there's a lot of erasure. There's a lot of missing parts of the story of law. And as you probably already all know, those erasures are not random. It is a systematic exclusion of the stories of violence against people of color, struggles of people of color, and contributions of people of color. And when you take into account that erasure and look for the stories that have been erased, the story of law that you get is very different from the kind of stock narratives about different parts of law, subjects in law, that people are traditionally taught, that we've all come to accept, that people understand are kind of the basics of contract law, civil procedure, property, torts, whatever. If you restore those erasures and you look for the actual history of what happened, you get a history of struggles for freedom, histories about the importance of movements, histories about the way movements changed the law, about the ways that violence works through the law, the way that power works through the law. You see how legal efforts work together with extra legal violence. The way, especially for me always, that the law has facilitated collective racial violence and how our law has been shaped by that history. And as I teach these subjects in my, both in 1L classes and seminars, I just want to say that students really find it a relief. In my experience, my students have really found it a relief to learn about the law in ways that help them understand the world that they live in, things that they recognize in their own environments, in their own experiences. And I also deeply believe that a lot of the people in power would not be so woefully unprepared for this moment we're living through if the account of law we were taught had centered the experiences of people of color all the way through. So that's the kind of work that I'm engaged in, and what I see to be the value of critical race studies from the work that I'm doing and the work that so many of my amazing colleagues are doing. So thanks again for the invitation to be here. I look forward to connecting with many of you.
It was so great, Kesu, and part of speaking to this point of Zoom and how it connects, it is so great to see you again and to know of this unbelievable, rich and important work you're doing. How do you participate? I'm going to offer you some of the details, but to understand how you can get involved as lawyers, you have to have some understanding of how we're asking students to be involved. Essentially, we're telling students that there are two main pieces of this project. One is a set of requirements or Saturday sessions where we imagine there will be 10, 3, occasionally 4-hour sessions devoted to certain topics, and those sessions will be spaced between October 3rd and April 10th, so beginning in just a couple of weeks. Of those sessions, we will be taking up certain topics, and these are topics that Justin and I, at least as a starting point, have used as our vision of kind of how we will walk through what we consider to be some of the elements that are left out of much of law school, including an overview and critique of legal education, the history of legal education, student movements in legal education, and so forth. An overview of different forms of legal theory, including the sorts of legal theory that Kay-Sue was just describing, and the kind of legal theory that people like Justin brought to help bring to Georgetown and to other schools through his journal, and that Michael is helping to bring through his almost theoretical view of what lawyering can be in his Movement Lawyering journal. And then we'll spend some time also there talking about critiques of basic forms of more dominant or legal theories. And then we will take up a couple of Saturdays to look at some of the classic cases in the 1L curriculum, to analyze them from a critical perspective that we have already set up in those previous sessions, and give them now a new reading with a new lens to see how they feel. And we'll do the same thing for some of the cases in the 2L and 3L curriculum. And by we, I really mean you. That is, Justin and Enyamale and I and the students who are helping us are trying to create a platform by which the expertise and knowledge that many of you have already gained, the skills you have in teaching some of these things, we can tap into that and bring you to this place to help build these Saturday sessions. We'll then have 2 sessions on systemic lawyering, whereby we mean everything from, say, impact litigation, which someone mentioned in the chat, to holistic defense, to community lawyering, to movement lawyering, and so forth. So we'll try to cover a range of types of lawyering where the lawyers themselves are devoted to not just representing individual clients, but also keeping an eye to the larger systemic effects of the law and how they can alter those systems by serving as a lawyer. Then we'll have a session on life as a systemic lawyer, which I'll spare you the details of, and we'll have a career fair that is optional for students, but that's one thing we're hoping that almost all of you will be willing to participate in, the date to be determined. And then there will be a session devoted to student presentations of whatever they want to do. Should be clear, their work and their contributions will be interwoven throughout all of these, but this one will be exclusively theirs. And then we'll also have a retreat. So there are 11 items there, one of which is optional for students. So we're telling them there are 10 required sessions. We consider this to be the heart of the community building opportunities, the hub of where people get to know each other, where they're meeting in breakout sessions, where they're being assigned to different interest areas and having conversations based on that. So many of the connections from which other kinds of relationships will build will happen in those Saturday sessions. So we're very much hoping to have robust participation on the part of many of you in that, in those. So now, what can you do? Well, our feedback from some of you is understandable, that A, you really want to be involved, and B, you absolutely can't be involved. And that kind of dilemma is one that we've tried to resolve by coming up with 3 different levels of involvement. For those of you who have small kids or who are just have teaching duties on Saturdays, or major cases underway in the fall and so forth, we understand that you can't be at all 10 of them, but we are asking for you to be to at least one of them. And if you're willing to, at this moment, in good faith, say, yeah, you know what, I want to be part of this whole organization, but I can probably only be confident about attending 1 to 3 of those Saturday sessions, then we'd like you to do that and sort of designate yourself as a friend of the Justice Initiative. Now, the friends will also be included in all our emails, asked to participate on the Slack, otherwise paying attention to what's going on. If there is some collective effort, some action that students are involved with, we'll hope that you'll take those up and be supportive. Those of you willing to make a slightly greater commitment to Saturday sessions and try to attend roughly half of them, we'd love for you to do that. You have the time and bandwidth to do that. We're going to call you allies, and among the allies, we're hoping that you will be willing to participate in some of the other kinds of options that students will have and that we will facilitate this year. A bit more about those in a moment. And then finally, those of you who are really into this and excited about it and have the time to do it, we'd like to call you partners. So those of you who are partners will be really just like the students, more or less. They're at most of the Saturday sessions, and you'll be participating in at least 2 of the additional kind of elements of the program, which now I'll tell you about what those additional elements are. So for the students, we imagine trying to facilitate and create opportunities that are outside of the Saturday sessions. Some of these will be responsive to what's going on in the world. Some of these will be responsive to particular student interest who want to dig deeper on some topic. And some of them will be responsive to something that happened in the Saturday session where we have a speaker who wants to come back and hold office hours with a small group of students and so forth. So this set of options that we hope to facilitate, and we imagine will often emerge spontaneously and organically, include things like discussion groups that follow from what's going on, or there's an election coming up and maybe we're not talking about the election, but students really want to talk about it across campuses and so forth, maybe to build some kind of action across campuses. We want to facilitate that. Reading groups where students want to read a particular book, where you perhaps have an expertise in an area and want to bring some articles and lead a reading group in that space. Those are all great things that we want to encourage and think we will be able to. Also, as I've mentioned, organizing and action groups that emerge out of this. And then we also imagine some institution building teams, as we already have these great groups that Enyamali mentioned, for example, the outreach group or the online infrastructure group, and et cetera. We're going to want to keep those going and would love, and we're doing that, and we'll probably keep that going during the year. Now, what does this mean for you? Given what students are required to do and your levels of participation in those requirements, and given the optional things that students are doing, we think there's a whole bunch of other things you could participate in if you wanted to. And we are hoping that some of these will be appealing to you and give you something that you want out of this program in addition to simply the classes. Here is a list. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Essentially, you can be a Saturday, if you're interested, let us know you want to be a Saturday session presenter on some topic. We want to know that because we're going to be putting those sessions together, or perhaps a panelist in one of those. You could be a reading group leader. So what we required of you above is just to participate in a reading group, but you could also be a leader. You could help organize and bring the readings together and facilitate the reading group discussions and so forth. You could be a discussion group leader or facilitator, same basic idea, on a topic to be selected really in that moment. You could be a breakout room facilitator, by which we mean so you help us plan an event, and then we hold breakout rooms in the middle of one of our Saturday sessions, and you serve to facilitate the conversation itself to help us make the most out of that opportunity. You could serve as an advisor and be willing to meet with one or more groups of students regarding career-related advice that you might feel prepared to give and that they might want to have. Or you can make a slightly greater investment and become a mentor, by which we mean you would be willing to meet with one or more students individually to listen, to hear about what they want to do, to offer your own guidance about how they might do it, some encouragement, and perhaps even some assistance along the way. You could also be a pro bono supervisor. That is, many students will be able to gain relationships with lawyers and legal organizations through this initiative, and those relationships will give them opportunities to do work for pro bono credit with their law schools. And I've talked to the folks at Harvard Law School, and they're very eager to facilitate that, and this is something you could help us out on the other side. And similarly, with respect to rapid response efforts, where you or your organization needs something very quickly, that may not even be that legal, it may be law related, maybe a hotline or something else that you're responding to in the moment. We've had a lot of these lately, and it's a place where you could draw from large numbers of students if you're willing to set that up and supervise it. You could be help supervise an independent or external clinic where students are actually getting credit, clinical credit, for working with your organization on some project for credit over the course of the semester. And of course, you could be a host of summer jobs or summer internships with your organization. And this would be a place where you could get to know students and make those kinds of connections and offers. And finally, you could participate on some of these special project teams and help, for example, with outreach or online or what have you. So those are the ways in which you can be helpful. And what we have done is created a survey that asks you to fill in, kind of what your interests would be and what level of involvement you would want to have. And from that, you will be able to register, and we'll be able to get back and sort of let you know, and then we can begin from there. But we would ask that you would complete that registration survey. I'll give you the link in just a moment. By October 1st, and sooner the better. And if you have any questions, that you let us know. Because the really important date is our first session, which is October 3rd. It'll go from 3 to 6. And we will be doing something on legal education. So if you happen to have expertise on legal education itself, and you want to be you're interested in participating in some way, register soon and let us know that that's an interest of yours. And then on April 10th will be the last date, and then we are working with a team of students to pick the calendar of summer sessions between that, and we will we hope by October 3rd we'll have a complete schedule ready to share. So we're asking you to commit on the theory that there will be Saturdays that you will be giving up, knowing that you don't know which Saturdays, and we'll take that into account. We're just asking you to make your best guess at this moment. So finally, I would just say, here's some next steps. If you're interested in doing this, the registration link can be found at the tinyurl.com JI for Justice Initiative registration. And if one of you can type that into so people can link to it, that would be great. If you have questions, email us at 2020justiceinitiative@gmail.com. We're monitoring that, and some of the questions that are coming in, we are trying to not just respond to, but then create a kind of FAQ page on the Systemic Justice blog to keep people updated. And you can follow that at the lower link on these bullets. So that was my attempt to be fast. I know that maybe that wasn't fast enough, but I hope it wasn't too fast and that you were able to get what you needed to get to be able to make a decision. I'll be quiet now and see if there's anyone left. And if I think we'd love to take some questions for anyone who has them.
Yeah, we'd absolutely love to take some questions. Please use the either the chat or the Q&A function. And as we said, we do have an email address. So if anything pops up after this, please feel free to reach out that way as well. I do see one question. Will the survey include the approximate time commitment for each participation level? That would be helpful.
Yes, it doesn't, but the math is easy. If we're imagining that the participation levels are how many sessions you're sort of committing to the Saturday sessions, those are going to be mostly 3 hours. So if you're committing to 1 to 3 of them, it's 1 to 3 times 3 and so forth in terms of time commitment. In terms of what comes of the discussion groups or the reading groups, those are going to be shaped very much by the participants in them. And so the level of commitment in time commitment in each of those will depend on what is determined by the individuals who come together, probably via Slack, to create those relationships.
We have another question. Do you have to be an actively practicing attorney to participate?
So I'm going to just say no. All you have to do is be someone who is has gone through law school and actually really caring about justice. I think the question is whether your experience will overlap enough with what will be the core of this group and your commitment to these larger goals is shared. Then I think we would love to have you.
Okay, another question. Is it possible to be a friend and still join in the extracurriculars, or do you need to commit at the ally level for those groups?
Our view, Justin and Yamali, correct me, is that no, the friend, ally, partner is really how many Saturday sessions that you sort of make your best effort to attend. You commit to doing that. And that's because we think those sessions are really critical to building this network and this community, and having people there routinely, most of the time or much of the time, and knowing that the people are there who are making a real commitment and so forth. So that's separate. And then that list of 12 items really is a separate set of things that you can do. So you can actually say, I'm down for being a friend, but what I'd really love to do is participate in a reading group, or I'd really love to do is, you know, help with a session on X. And if you let us know through the survey, we'll count you in, and we'll also keep track of that information and try to bring you in at some point in our planning going forward.
Another question. At this time, are the only students participating in this initiative HLS or HUSL students? So Harvard or Howard? No, this is open to all law students. The students we've been working with these past few weeks have been from schools all across the country. So it's definitely not limited to Howard or Harvard law students. Another question, are the Saturday sessions going to be in webinar format, or will we be able to see other participants in the future?
You'll be able to see.
All right, I am not seeing any more questions. As we said, if a question pops up later, feel free to email us. We are monitoring our email account and do our best to respond promptly.
Justin, I've spoken way too much, and I'd love it if you might be willing to close us today.
Sure. Well, again, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking time out of your Saturday. I'm so excited about this project. I think it will change things for the better across the country, legal education, the legal landscape. So many people will be inspired. So many people will be better off. So we're hoping that you can participate in any of those levels and help us to enrich this program so that we can change the world in our small way. So thank you all for participating once again, and we hope you have a great Saturday evening.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care.